Okay. Hello and welcome to Behind the Locked Doors, what should just be a conference call that probably could have been an email, but instead we've made it into a whole podcast. I am Scott Paladin. I am working on a horny werewolf noir audio drama called It Takes a Wolf.
And I'm Sam Stark, and I'm working on my own podcast, As in West, which is a spinoff of Unspeakable Distance. And I think that the tagline for this podcast should be something like "It should have been an email" or something, or "It could have been an email."
It could have been an email.
Yeah.
And then Jack is out. They are moving or otherwise busy. So we're giving them a pass this time. So it's just me and Sam this time. We'll start with our check-ins like normal. Sam, how did you do on, I forget what it was that you had said you were going to do.
Whatever it was that I said I was going to do, I got it done because I'm pretty much up to like where I'm supposed to be with all of my things. And I did work on As in West, but it was another one of those like sitting in a chair staring at the wall and like letting it percolate in my brain, like but in the forefront of my brain, because I discovered these last couple weeks that I am still kind of hung up on the start of the show, and it's bothering me a lot more than I thought it was, because I said before that I did not want this to be a podcast where you come into it and it's like, well, you have to have listened to Unspeakable Distance to know what's going on. And also I didn't want to do a massive info dump right at the beginning, because that's really annoying for new listeners. And so I am actually still really, really kind of unhappy with the beginning and how we're going to come into it. And so I spent several hours actually sort of just letting it like go in my brain and trying to think of a better way to begin the podcast. And I think that's my biggest problem, my biggest hurdle, the thing that's sort of stopping me from getting anywhere, any real ground on this, on writing this. And so, but at least I kind of, even though I didn't actually write anything or put anything into any documents, I did kind of diagnose the problem.
Oh yeah,
so that's what
super important for the process, because like you can't, until you identify what's going wrong, then like, in a lot of ways, like if you'd gone off and written 5,000 words, a bunch of that might be stuff that you would have to go back and undo and unravel and change, and it becomes harder if you kind of spin off in the wrong direction. So like laying a good foundation really can be super important.
Yeah.
So like I think a lot of people discount the amount of time, like how the amount of the process of writing is just like staring like blankly into space, or at a wall, or like while you're driving your car or something, where you're like thinking about the thing, but you're not actually doing any quote unquote writing. But like, that's a draft. Like when you think through things in your head, that's one of the drafts, because it, and it's actually super useful because, I'm going to tie that back in when we talk about the next, our topic for the middle section, which we want to get to. Let me do my update first.
Yes.
Which is that I have done, I think I wrote about 1,200 words of episode 3. Episode 3 is like 2/3 done now, which is really good. I'm feeling quite good about that one. I was hoping to get a little farther on it, but that just didn't work. That happens. I had one of those moments of being forced to do a second draft on a part because I had written a few hundred words, and then I came back the next day and my computer had done an update and rebooted, and I apparently hadn't saved.
God.
And so I was like, well, okay, I can pretty much remember what I wrote last night, so let me just do it again. And it's slightly different now, but I guess that's better. Like,
Oh, that's the worst. Oh my God.
I heard was it one of y'all that told me there was somebody who does a second draft by literally writing out the first draft, and then they delete the entire thing and they try to write it again from memory, and only the things that are important come back. So like, I
did not say that, but it sounds familiar. So yeah.
So basically forced version of that. And then I've gotten a bunch of other like miscellaneous jumping around. Let me write a little section here. Let me write a little section there. So I've got bits and chunks that might get slotted into later episodes. So I feel like I'm making like this is the first time in a minute that or not first time, but like this is one of the times where I feel like, okay, I've made good progress. We're sliding along. I'm sort of tentatively hoping that I can have things released by the end of the year. So but it's already fucking May. So I'm like, oh, okay, I need to kind of, I am feeling the pressure of like needing to step up. but that of course is a self-imposed thing. There are no rules, so like I
Yeah.
don't have to do it that way. But I do feel like I'm excited. I want to get it done. I want to already be working on the other parts of all this. So,
That's so
but yeah,
important, the being excited about it.
yeah.
Like, that's a huge, huge thing. And you've been throwing up so much stuff in the Discord, like, you've been throwing
Oh,
and it's not like you're not throwing up, like, actual things that are going into it, but you are throwing
yeah,
up huge, long chunks of, like, ideas and, like,
yeah,
throwing things around, and that I mean, that's huge too, so
yeah. It's really interesting because I typically I would sometimes have done that in a notepad, and it's interesting how doing something like this sort of free form thought process of just like ask myself a question, think about the answer, and like work my way through it. But knowing that there are like little goblins looking in on the thought process is interesting. It's like you have an observer bias, or like
yes.
an observer effect, where
Yeah.
like I know I'm being read. It changes things a little bit, which I find super useful. I like the fact that I know that at any point I might get feedback on what I'm doing,
Yeah.
which is cool.
My process is very, um, lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had that, like I'm a very, like, "No, you can't look at it till it's done," type of a person, and
Oh
so
yeah,
I've never shown anyone anything that is partially done, and so I wonder how I probably would also benefit from people seeing the goblins, looking at it
yeah,
as I'm working on it, but I don't know. I don't know how my brain works with that whole thing. I'd have to try it and see.
yeah. That's I really really feel you on that one. The one of the reasons why I feel like this is helpful is because it forces me out of my own uh comfort zone. Um, I, there's a much larger discussion to be had about like the role of ego in art creation of art, because
Mhm.
like you kind of have to be egotistical to create art a little bit. Like you kind of have to think, I am important enough that the things I have to say are worth listening to,
Yeah.
which means that you have to have some amount of ego in order to like be an artist
Yes.
and a certain amount of self-assurance in order to like deal with other people giving you negative reviews and things like that. And like you're dealing with which is mostly about them, and you have to understand that. But then also like the desire to be the auteur, right? Like, which is also a part of ego of like, I am going to be the one who does this and it's going to be good. Creates a certain amount of pressure, which is counterproductive to the sort of playful nature of creativity. That
Mhm.
like, if you are not showing people things until they are like done and ready and perfect, then that can also lead to a situation where you're like, I'm never showing anyone anything because it never really meets my standards, which is a kind of defense mechanism for the ego, because you need it to be perfect in order to be good. And it will never be absolutely perfect. And in fact, lots of times it can't be perfect without input from other people. And so you end up in this situation where you're like, well, I never fail until I show it to somebody.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
yeah. Which that sounded like I was responding to what you were saying, but that was all just shit that's in my back history. Like that was therapy. That was not like,
Yes, yes. There's a lot of I have been in a lot of writers groups,
Mhm,
and it's so interesting to see the similarities between the people that always are talking about the thing that they're writing, or they're
mhm,
always talking about a thing that they are going to write, and they have all these ideas and they have all their
mhm.
characters fleshed out. They have their entire book in their head and they have not written a single word. And then the similarities between the people that have written a whole bunch and are never satisfied with it. And every single, week that you guys meet up, they're like, "Oh yeah, I just have a couple revisions I want to do before I let you guys see it." And then of
Oh
course
yeah.
you got the people that are like, "Look at this, please help me. This I think I like this, but I'm not sure." And it's so interesting to see the character traits and
Yeah.
the ways that those groups of people are all so eerily similar. And I don't know,
Mhm.
I'm a people watcher, and so that was sometimes more fun, like going and watching the people in the writers groups than actually doing the writing stuff.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of those mechanisms hint of ego to me, of like, I'm going to it's really fun. You don't have to do any of the like actual work of like improvement if you
Mhm.
just are like, or it's not risky at that point. Like one person's not risking anything by actually doing the writing, and the other person's not risking anything by actually showing it to anybody.
Yeah.
Um, and those are both kind of protective mechanisms,
Yes. Yes.
which is unfortunate. It's one of those things like, I will say this is somewhat tangential, but the collaborative writing that we've done in on Breathing Space, which is the first time I worked in a space like that, where we're like all working on our own things that are related. Everybody kind of knows what's going on. One of the best, possibly the best thing about that is the ability to just like throw a single chunk of text into a group chat, and like even if it's something even if I like this bit and I want other people to see it, but even if I have to cut it later, it's now seen by an audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's now fulfilled its purpose.
Yes,
and in a way that it's helpful for me because it means that I can be like, well, I can write a joke and I can throw it into the Discord. And I've been doing this with the It Takes a Wolf stuff too, where I've thrown stuff in. I'm like, I'm going to show this either to Jack and Sam or I'm going to show it to the full Discord, literally because I think I might cut this later. This might end up getting cut, but I want somebody to see it because I think it's funny.
Yes.
And that kind of one thing that really is helpful with that is it shortens the like feedback period. Because one thing about because writing is such a long cycle time from when you work on it to when people see it and you get feedback on it, that if you get like little chunks of that like neurotransmitter hit of like, here's a thing, what do you guys think of it? It is very helpful for the like getting yourself ramped up and excited about a thing, because you can do that in a way that like other times writing doesn't do, because you would write something for 6 months and then it would get published and it'd be a year later and then it would get out and you'd be like, well, does anybody actually like this?
Yeah.
Oh wait, it was a year ago. I don't actually know.
I don't remember what I wrote. I think that is that's why I did fan fiction for so long. I wanted to hone my craft. I wanted to be a better writer, and I needed to have people reading it quickly. And I didn't want to wait like weeks and weeks and weeks between writers groups. And with fan fiction, you get that dopamine like right away. So,
and fan fiction is one of the few places where you can serialize like the written word, where you can write a chapter at a time and just put it out, and people will read a chapter at a time. They used to be able to do that with magazines. Like that was how Charles Dickens used to publish, right? He'd publish a chapter at a time in a newspaper or a magazine.
Pretty sure Stephen King did that too. For a little while,
and like, well, and like as recent as and Raymond Chandler did his stuff that way and stuff too. Like there was an entire like industry of like serialized fiction that just kind of doesn't exist anymore when the book sort of took over and like the novel format really shone. And there is something to be said for the process of just like figuring a thing out as you go and like getting the kind of immediate feedback of just running it. And fan fiction is like the last bastion of that existing.
Yeah. Kindle did it with Kindle Vella. But it really didn't take off. Like for some, it wasn't rolled out very well. It wasn't advertised very well. I wrote my book on Kindle Vella, and it was really great because I would set 5,000 words a week. That was like, because you can't put more than 5,000 words in a chapter. So I was like, okay, so I got to do about 5,000 words, and I would put it out every single Tuesday, and I would get feedback immediately, and it was great because like once it was done, hey, that's a book that's done, and then I just published it on Amazon, and it was very, very motivating, and it was like clockwork. Every single week, I got another chapter done. And I wish that more people knew about it, and I wish that it was more accessible because, of course, it's Amazon, and you got to pay for more than the first like 4 chapters or something. So that's not, I mean, nobody wants to like pay for every single chapter unless it's like an author that they already know and they, they already are feel safe with them.
They don't want to they don't want to, getting the audience to take a risk on something like that is different.
Yeah. If they had set it up differently where it was like you pay for the service, and then you don't have to pay for every single friggin' chapter of something, it probably could have worked better, but it was still a good idea in, I guess, spirit, I guess. Yeah.
I could absolutely, it's one of those things where, as a for certain genres, especially that serialized format, I feel like could still work if the audiences were acclimated to it. I'm thinking romance 100%. Specifically.
Yeah.
That like, that's, in fact, and there are many within the genre of romance, the sort of conventions of that sort of like the building of tension over time actually in a lot of ways could be enhanced by piecemealing it out one chapter at a time. And then things like Dracula Daily proves that like if you can get an entire audience of people who are like sort of moving in real time with a story, that also builds a certain kind of community. And a different interaction than just everybody binging it all at once.
Yeah.
Just it's one of those things that it used to exist. It just does, and it kind of doesn't anymore. But I think it's still a valuable art form. I wish there was more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I brought up the thing I wanted to talk about this week, you were like, oh yeah, we have to talk about that. So we're gonna drag the audience along for you and I to have a discussion about Kill Your Darlings.
Yes.
I don't know if it's, I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure I would call it the worst piece of writing advice, because there are so much more worse ones. But I will start off by saying I figured out the axiom that I want to communicate that is related to this, which is all single sentence pieces of advice for art are bullshit.
Yes. Oh my God, it's so true.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that you couldn't take the idea behind something like Kill Your Darlings and expand it and talk about like what it actually means. And if you get the paragraph version of Kill Your Darlings, then maybe that's useful. But the phrase itself is so contextless that it's useless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to in case there are people listening to who are not familiar with this piece of advice, comes from the idea that you should not be precious with the things that you personally like about a piece of art, and you should be prepared, or in fact eager, to kill off the things that you like in service of the story as a whole. Which I think is, in that form, is not the worst piece of advice I've ever heard. But that is not always the piece of advice. That is not how this is always presented to new writers. Does that make sense? Does that feel like a reasonable explanation of Kill Your Darlings to you?
That the way that you just phrased it is the way that I have always thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There's a lot of people that give that advice, but they don't mean it that way, or they don't sort of say it that way. And so, for example, at a lot of the cons that I go to, I'll go to writing panels or whatever, and I've been on writing panels where they talk about killing your darlings. I almost said kill your guardians, and and they really kind of put it forward to people, especially new writers, like, so just for your information, once you're done with this book and you have your draft, you are absolutely going to have to cut your favorite part. And they will always make it sound exactly like that. Whatever your favorite part is in this book, you're going to have to fucking cut it. And it's so odd, because like I never considered, before I had actually started talking to people in the writing community, I'd never taken it that way. Because with my book, the one that I wrote on Kindle Vella, it is too long, and I am aware that it's too long, and it probably needs a lot of things cut, because there's probably a lot in there that isn't totally necessary.
Sure.
I know the parts that are necessary, like the actual story beats, and I know the lore parts that need to be in there to make the story make sense.
Yeah.
But I know there's a bunch of filler and a bunch of fluffy things that I enjoyed, and I put in there because I had readers reading it every week that probably need to be cut. And I don't really want to lose any of that. And when I think about the idea that someday, if I ever let an editor look at it, they'll cut a whole bunch of stuff that I like. But right now, thinking about it, I can't think of a single actual part that I would think is what they would cut. I'm just worried about everything that they would cut, because I like all of it. And so there's no specific part where I'm like, oh my God, if they cut this one right here, I would die, like it's, I think that it's more the fact that somebody is going to come in and cut out a bunch of my hard work, or even a little bit of my hard work. I mean, it's kind of like the whole thing is a darling, but how much of that is it's become a darling because I am worried they're going to cut it, and it's an actual, it's a very complicated thing, and I hate it when they boil it down to such a dumb little phrase.
And excuse me. The thing about the advice of Kill Your Darlings is, again, I think the best version of it is, don't be precious with the ideas.
Exactly.
if you look at what your story is and you go, oh well, this isn't working. I love this, but it's not working. I got to be prepared to, get in there and remove it so that the cut off something that I really like in order for the rest of the work to survive. But when it's presented as, you will have to do this, sometimes what that advice morphs into is is a more seasoned person telling a less experienced person, hey, the things that you like, especially the things that in fact are what you get excited about, and therefore because they're the things that you're bringing to your art, they are like the things that are most you about it. You're going to need to cut those.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And when you Kill Your Darlings, there's I've been thinking a lot about the sort of metatextual cycle of art, which is that there's the two sides of the cycle where there is creation and then there's revision, right? Or writing and editing, or sketching and then like refining the lines, or like there's always in every version of art that I've ever come across, there's like a version where there's free creation and then a version where you take that creation and you pair back to the parts that you actually want to keep.
Yeah.
And Kill Your Darlings lives only in that second section. It lives like it can only be a thing about revision. It cannot. It is an advice specifically about one half of it. But when you are in the early stages of your creation, of doing art, you spend most of your time in the first half of that cycle. You are mostly just creating, and it is anathema to good art for you to let the editor's voice into the creation side of things. You can't be revising all of the time. You have to just like let things go for a while so that you can create, so that you can come up with ideas, so that you can let things live. And then once you've done the work, you can go back in and revise. And Kill Your Darlings is the kind of advice that can creep. You can let that advice creep into the creation side of things and color how you are creating things. You say, well, I'm going to have to kill this later, so I'm not even going to bother writing it. And it's like, that's such a deathly part of things, like, because you should write it. If it's something you're excited about and something you like, then you need to put it down. You need to put it on the page, because there's no guarantee that when you get to the revision section that you're going to go, oh crap, this isn't working. And even to the point where something like they talk about Kill Your Darlings as if like, okay, you need to, the favorite part, your favorite thing in the novel, your the scene that you like the best, the line that you like the most, isn't serving the art, and the response is you should kill it. Except that that's not the only response. One of the responses is kill everything but your darlings. If you get to the end of a work and you go, I like this and this and this, but they're not really serving. I accidentally wrote a different book around them. Then like there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, these are the things I want to keep. They're the things that get me most excited. I should figure out how to make them work, like, because that is what gets you excited. If it's something that you like your taste is not valueless. If you like it, then there's a pretty good chance your audience will like it too. And there's value in like trying to make it work. Now, sometimes that will not be, you sit down and you say, I'm going to write book X, and you wrote book X, and something that you introduced as an element that you really like isn't serving it. You go, well, I guess I got to cut it, because I really do think that the work as a whole is better and will be better without it. But like, it's not the only answer.
Yeah.
So again, like the single sentence version of it, totally useless. But like within a greater context of things, it has a heart of useful advice to it, but like often is presented in a way that just sucks.
Yeah. And I like what you were talking about with, you need to like let it go and not worry and just create it the way that you feel it needs to be created. And I wanted to kind of touch on something else that I learned a couple years ago that was really kind of invaluable to me. A lot of people are scared of editing, and they're scared of other people editing their stuff. Because they are worried that they're going to cut a bunch of things they like, or they're just going to be like, hey, your writing sucks. I can't edit this because it's so bad. Like, everybody's always worried that's going to happen. But talking about how you were saying a second ago that writing is an art and you're creating and you're making this thing, you have to remember, somebody told me once that you have to remember that an editor is also an artist. And even though they're cutting things away and they are maybe, taking scissors and cutting up your beautiful work of art, you have to remember that like, just because they're taking things away doesn't mean that they're not creating as well, because a sculptor takes, clay and will cut away from it, or a stone cutter, they will cut away. It's just a different form of art. And they will be able, a good editor will be able to see the darlings, that you love. And if you were to tell them ahead of time, like, this is really the core. This is like the heart of the
Mhm.
story. And I'm so worried that it doesn't fit. The editor should be able to see, if they were to carve around that
Mhm.
you're right. And this is a different
Yeah.
story. And so you shouldn't be afraid of an editor, and you shouldn't be afraid of what an
Yeah.
editor is going to do. They are an artist just like you. And if you work
Yeah.
with them, you should be able to sculpt whatever you have made into the best thing that it can be. And
Yeah.
I was like, blown away when I heard that the first time, because I was, a new writer, and I was like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, they're gonna come here and destroy my story, or they're gonna hate it. But it really is like, you have to work in tandem with your editor.
Yeah. Well, and editors bring, they are having an external person edit your work, because we've all written, I don't know about everybody who's done this, but almost all of us have written things and then edited ourselves and then just released it, where there was a single person involved and nobody else ever came in. And that can work, but editors bring a lot of valuable stuff to the table. They bring perspective because they haven't been in the trenches this whole time. They're coming at it fresh.
Yes.
Or at least with some amount of distance that like you don't have, because you're the one who created everything. And so they don't know all of the stuff that you've got in your head. They don't have any of the story that comes along with, like, when I say they don't know the story of the creation of the work, right? Like, they don't know all of the nights you sat up worrying over stuff. But that means that they can look at what you have actually presented them with a more refined, not refined, a clearer idea. They can look at it and go, here's what's actually happening here, right? Like, you have all these ideas in your head. You're very close to this. You're very emotional. Here's a broader perspective. Sometimes, and what you were talking about, how they're another artist going to come in and craft it by chiseling away at it as well. But I want to also emphasize is, whenever you work with an editor, it is collaborative.
Yeah.
Like, they don't, especially in fiction, if you were a newspaper writer and you're going to write a journal article, write a newspaper article and submit it, your editor will just go in there and just cut stuff, because that's how that business works.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about, that's not the way that fiction editing works. Like, they will come in and say, hey, you've got what seems like pacing problems right here. This part's very long and not a lot is happening here. Or it seems like this might work earlier this might work better if you brought it earlier, or this happened later, or if we cut this thing that doesn't seem like it needs to be part of the thing. And what that will do is, both, they are going to give you perspective and feedback that you may hear. The moment you hear it, you go, oh yeah, that's true. I'm sure that they will bring you insight that you recognize as real. And then also, sometimes they're going to say things and you're going to go, no, that's not right. And what that tells you is, oh, I didn't communicate why this needed to be this way in the story. And maybe it makes different changes down the line. In the breathing space writer's room, whenever I edit stuff, I'm always the guy telling people to cut stuff. I realize that's my role as like, hey, this is 20% too long. You need to cut 1,000 words out of this. It can handle it. And I've long ago come to accept that my role is often to be told no in that regard. That like, my job is not to, like, I'm not going to mandate that they have to do this. But if I say, hey, you can cut, like, this entire character is not necessary to your plot, to your theming, you don't need them. Sometimes what that does is they'll sit, a writer will go, okay, yeah, let me think about that. And they'll come back and they'll go, yeah, it looks like I could cut some additional content out of here. And sometimes they come back in and they go, no, that's bullshit, and I'll tell you why. And then they give me reasons why. And what that's told me is, I guess I'm wrong. Like, they have made the case for why that this edit didn't need to happen. But like, that's part of it. Like, you need to question these things. Nothing is sacred in these works. Like, you have to question these things in order to, like, be able to buttress your reasoning for why they happen and why they do the things that they do, so that you know that you're presenting something good. And that person, and at the end of the process, even if I've been told no and it's just as long as it was when I started, that's fine, at least for me as an editor, because I know that is, the person is doing it on purpose now. Like, I don't want them to be too long on accident just because they didn't realize what they were doing. But if they are including these things because they think that they're important, then that's great. That's closer to their artistic vision.
Yeah. And it's such a good conversation to have, because if you come back with hey, this character doesn't really give anything to the story, they're just kind of superfluous, like just there.
Yeah.
And if they come back with, no, the reason why they're here is this, and then you can come back with, oh, well, then you need to make sure that comes through, because they're not doing the thing that they're in there for.
Exactly. So like I think coming back to the conversation about ego, that like you are being scared of editing is definitely an ego protective process of like, this thing, I need it to be good because if it's good, then I'm good.
Yeah.
And which, when you say it aloud, does sound, I don't know, at least to me, it sounds a little bit stupid. And I recognize, I say that as somebody who thinks that all of the time.
Me too.
Like that is absolutely a thought process that I have. But like when you voice it, it's like, geez, that's not really true, you know? And nothing is good immediately. Like everything takes revision and work. And, you know, nobody just slams something. Well, most humans are not able to just slam out a perfect, you know, we're not all Harlan Ellison who writes, I have no mouse that I must stream in an evening. Like that's not, don't compare yourself to that guy. Truth be told, don't compare yourself to anybody. Like,
yes, do not do that.
Yeah. You're the only person to whom you should be compared. It's like your past self, you know, is maybe the only person you should be comparing to. Cause like the goal is to produce something that people love. And the only way to do that is to produce the best thing you can. And if you are going to leave options on the table because those options hurt your feelings, basically, then you are not going to produce as good a work as you can.
Yeah.
Again, I say this as if I'm talking to other people. I am talking to myself at this point. Like, yeah, it's fine.
Talking to future Scott.
Yeah.
Here, I'm gonna go on a tiny tangent, but I promise that there's a point to this. When you were talking about the, I don't remember exactly what the phrasing you used was, but it made me think of, like just sort of go off in my head about things that really could have used more editing.
Sure.
And my partner and I just last night watched the newer Rebel Moon movies that are the Snyder movies. And I heard a lot about how they were really, really terrible. They're just garbage movies. There's nothing to salvage, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of heart and a lot of really fun things in those movies. They are garbage. I mean, I'm not, not going against that, but it's so sad because the more stuff that Snyder does, the more control he has over like the entire aspect. He does the writing, he does the directing, he does the cinematography, and it's like this is a thing that one person made, and he kind of got in his head, and he has lots and lots of power and influence and money to do this without anybody telling him, "Oh, you can't do that." And a lot of things get lost in the sauce, and it's so sad because when I watched the first, not the second one, when I watched the first Rebel Moon, there's a heart in there. There is a story. There is something. There's some incredible world building. There are potentially some really good characters and some really great moments that could have happened. But because he doesn't have any oversight and there's nobody to come in there to like edit the thing, it gets very, very, very lost and bogged down in a bunch of trying to look cool. And so I immediately thought of that when you were talking about that, because if there had just been an editor on the first Rebel Moon, it could have been a pretty cool movie. Because I promise you, there is good stuff in there.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, 100%. Zack Snyder is a creator that I agree with you. Like, needs an editor. He needs somebody else out there giving. Because he can do, there are certain things he's just absolutely fantastic.
His first couple things when he was just directing, like The Watchmen, it's incredible.
Yeah. He's got talent. He needs to be part of a collaborative team.
Yes.
And I think a lot of there are directors and writers out there who we think of as being auteurs who are actually part of creative teams. And those are important people to pay attention to, because those are people who make great work.
Yeah.
And that's much more likely to be the case for almost everyone. You know, the Stanley Kubricks of the world. Actually, except Stanley Kubrick isn't even that good of an example. He was an auteur in a lot of ways, but he also was part of a collaborative team. He worked with production designers and script supervisors, and like he was. I mean, in fact, Stanley Kubrick's thing was more about business, about making sure that he had enough time by having enough money to do the thing than anything else. So like even like some of the people we think of as being like singular auteurs who did everything by themselves were actually like No, they were part of massive teams and were doing one small section of a greater whole in order to produce it.
Yeah.
That you reminded me also a lot of my reaction to the prequel movies from Star Wars in the late 90s, early 2000s, where when George Lucas was making the original Star Wars films, he did not have the clout to do anything he wanted, and he was part of a much larger team of people who were also giving input. And then 20 years passed, and he, was, he had fuck you money to the point where he could just make things on his own and did not need to pass anybody else's muster, which sounds like a dream for a creator, right? You get to do whatever you want. But I remember distinctly watching the behind the scenes videos of the productions of those movies and getting a kind of vibe from George Lucas of him like reaching out to other people and being like, this is good. Like, we like this, right? Like, this will work. And everybody around him being like, well, you're George Lucas. If you say it'll work. But he's a little bit like, guys, like, I feel bad for him now because I feel like, man, he was looking for people to bounce things off of him, and the people around him a little bit failed to give him strong opinions.
Yeah, he was just surrounded by yes men. Like, he's in that writers group where nobody actually knows what they're talking about, and they're worried they're going to offend this one person. Yeah.
Because I in interviews, I've never gotten the impression from anybody that George Lucas was like a tyrant who would like yell at you for telling him no. But like, if you grew up watching Star Wars and now you work at Lucasfilm, and George Lucas, the guy who created Star Wars, asks your opinion, well, you're like, well, what do I have? Like, he's my hero. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
Like, it's just one of those unfortunate things about like, he got so successful. Now, I know that those movies have gotten a bit of a not revision, what's the word I'm looking for? Where like people have like reevaluated them, right? And they say, oh, well, they're actually a lot better than they used to be. And I think that might be true. There was definitely some negativity that came from people like me who had like expected Star Wars to be a very specific thing, and this wasn't that. But I will also say that a lot of the reevaluation that's come about the prequels comes from several sources, one of which is the TV show, which George Lucas didn't direct. He didn't make those decisions. Yeah. Those were other people working within the constraints that he created. And then also, if you watched something as a kid and you come back as a 20 or 30-year-old and say, no, actually it's good for real, then like I'm not going to say that you're a suspect, your opinion is without merit, but rather like it is really, really hard to objectively evaluate something that you first saw when you were a child.
Yeah.
And children
especially
kind of don't have taste.
Yeah. If you loved it as a child, because you have all of that, the emotions and the memories and like the good kind of hazy childhood, that's covering it. There is so many.
Absolutely
good
nobody
things,
is immune from that as well.
Oh,
it's just that a person like me who is older, my biases just go in a different direction at different things.
I think that the best takes that I've seen on it are there are wonderful things that are happening in those first prequel movies. There is obviously a lot of heart in there. There's a love for that universe. There was just not a lot of editing that could have happened. It didn't.
Yeah.
A few mistakes were made.
Yeah. Which, I mean, like, on the one hand, it's like such a human thing, or like, well, we just could have used another pass. And then, truth be told, when you see those same ideas get another pass within things like the Clone Wars TV show, and later works like, to a certain extent, Star Wars Rebels does this too. It sort of takes another pass at some of these things that we thought were sort of established. And like, you can do really cool things in there.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, they do sometimes just need another set of eyes on there, another creative team to come in and experiment and to find cool things.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in that. In fact, there's a lot of value to be had in that moment of like finding how to make something work that previously had not worked.
Can you imagine the reason that the three prequel movies are so problematic in the Star Wars universe is just because George Lucas was such a nice guy and nobody wanted.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, it absolutely was that. Like, he is a good filmmaker.
So funny.
But like, he just kind of needed at least in my opinion, I think he needed somebody in there who was like loved him and was willing to be nice to him, but also was like, hey dude, the Phantom Menace fucking blows. This movie, like the like story structure that you've laid out here, like it grinds to a halt for like 60% of the middle of this movie, like is just like, it's just a slow crawl in a way that like doesn't fit a Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
And like, you know, we like these various elements and stuff, but also like, can you just like, can we rearrange this such that, you know, things make sense now? You know,
but who do you have to be to say that to George Lucas about Star Wars?
One of the narratives that I've heard is that one of the original editors for Star Wars was Marsha Lucas, was George Lucas's now ex-wife, but at the time his wife. And so you can imagine, like, surely there is a certain amount of like, hey, yeah, I can tell you whatever the fuck I want because like we're married. I don't have any hero worship for you because like you snore at night, you know, kind of person. There has been a prevailing narrative in that came out in the 90s. I think this is probably not true, which was that like when they broke up and she took off, and a bunch of people sort of wrote think pieces about like, well, she was actually one of the creative people behind Star Wars, and that really like it was her editing that made that work in a way that like George Lucas couldn't have done without her, which I think is probably true. But a lot of people then said, well, then he kind of got uppity about it and said, well, then I'm going to do exactly what I want and prove to people that I'm the one who actually created Star Wars. And so therefore didn't take input from people around him. And I don't, all of the interviews I've ever heard do not point that in that direction, that like, he seems to have been, he's a nice guy. He's not tyrannical. He does submit input, but I can just imagine how hard it would be to like, if somebody asked me tomorrow to talk to George Lucas, despite the fact that I am an opinionated Star Wars nerd who could tell people anything that's wrong with any part of this if you put me in a room with George Lucas tomorrow and asked me to like give him my advice, I couldn't fucking do it. No, of course not. Like, it's George Lucas. Right? Like, he's so much more like famous and wealthy than me, and he created one of the things I love most in the world. Like, I would have such a hard time giving him my unvarnished opinion. Like, I might be able to say some stuff, but they would be caveated in so many like, well, you know, this is just my opinion, and maybe you're right, and all that stuff.
And really, there wouldn't be any time because I would have to just profusely thank him for like, you know, my childhood and like, thank you for existing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think we also need to think about the technical side of it too, because when the first Star Wars came out, I remember watching the makings of those, and they had a lot of the same things that Jaws did. Jaws is the movie that it is because they couldn't make the fucking shark work.
Oh yeah.
And so the original Star Wars had a lot of constraints due to just practical effects, and they didn't have all the CGI. And then the prequels had limited whatever the hell you could possibly think of could be in the movie. And again, that is a substantial amount of things that needed to be edited, and it wasn't, and he could just do whatever he wanted, and it just gave him more places where he could maybe make the wrong choice.
Yeah, there's a whole giant conversation to be had about working within the limitations of the medium, and like that being not just something that you have to do, but that's something you should be looking for and engaging in, because like art, if you had infinite money and you had infinite time and physics didn't matter and you could do whatever you want, then it is difficult to find the limitations of the art that you'll create.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're sitting in a world with endless possibilities. Whereas if you say, I have X number of, I have $1,000. I have one camera that does not do 4K. I have 3 actors and I have no sets. What can you make? And like something like when you sit down and ask those questions and really look at what you have available to you and try to work within those constraints, you'll do something like you'll be Kevin Smith and you'll make Clerks, a movie that on a like budget of I think $27,000 or something like that, some incredibly small budget, even for the 90s. He made a movie that then influenced culture for the next. We're still living in a world that comes out of 2 guys talking next to each other in a rundown bar or in a dead end job. That being a setup that works, and like having them talk about pulp culture, like that was a new thing that happened because of Clerks. And we still live in a world like in that feels the effects of him having made that movie. And that entire movie comes out of the limitations of Kevin Smith not having any money and only having access to his friends. And so he's quote unquote hiring people from his neighborhood to do this movie. So he writes a movie that works for that. And then you look 20 years later when he has, millions of dollars that he can spend on his productions, and he makes movies that arguably are far less influential, like because and I think I'm not going to put all of the blame of that on the fact that he can do whatever he wants now, because he can't. But like, there is something really valuable about understanding the limitations that you're working within and just like leaning into those and seeing where, because you have those limitations, that will push you to express your art in different ways. Like that will make you say, well, I can't do this, but I can do X as much as I want.
Mm-hmm.
So what can I do with X?
Mm-hmm.
And that will force you to do things that you wouldn't necessarily have done, that you haven't seen done before. And that'll be good. It'll be really good for you. So you should be looking at those limitations and trying to figure out what you're going to do with them.
Forcing your already creative brain to be creative in other ways, and having to, think of ways to do the things that you want to do, or at least think of ways that you have to do a thing and you can only do it in this small little, like being forced to really think outside the box. I just think for creative people, that's a really good thing. And there's so many movies that are like that were made on a shoestring budget, and they were super influential because you can feel it. You can feel the heart and the creativity in there.
Well, and like, it's not just movies and budget, right? Like, I do not want to make this sound like I think that this is going to work, because it's not made yet. But like, It Takes a Wolf, that entire concept came from me thinking about the limitations of a werewolf story in audio drama.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I was like, how do you do how do you inform a transformation without actually, like, you can't do it on screen. I can't show somebody a wolf, right? Like, I can't show them the transformation sequence. And then thinking through the ideas, I'm like, well, what if I had a second voice actor for the other character that would communicate clearly when that is a wolf? And I was like, oh wait, that's a really cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then this entire like project spun from that one moment of me thinking about the limitations that I was working within and what can I do to overcome them. And that's the heart of the project. Like that couldn't be translated into another medium because it comes out of the very constraints of the medium I'm working in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's great. And like, that's like, it's a minor example in the grand scheme of things, but like, that's exactly the kind of thing an artist needs to be looking for, is like, what are my limitations and how can I overcome them in interesting ways? What's my solution? And then looking at when you come up with something that works, you go, well, what can I do with this? What does that mean for the story? How does that change, what I'm talking about? I don't know if the audience can hear it, but there is a dog sleeping at my feet, and he's having dreams right now.
He's like twitching, little ears.
Yeah, but I can hear him like, I'm gonna get the mic. I can't get the mic next to him. Let me see. Quiet it down.
Oh no, he's awake. Oh,
he's like. But he was going. That's really cute.
Such a cutie. Well, I'm very glad that our talk about killing darlings morphed into Zack Snyder and Star Wars. That was a wonderful journey that we've gone on.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go ahead and let the audience go, and I will probably just edit this and put it out like now. So we will catch. Well, wait. We have to set up our expectations.
Oh yeah.
So. The favorite part every week, right? So let's start with Sam. Do you have anything you want to set expectations for the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and set aside some time with Jack. I'm going to make it a priority to have like an hour where I can sit down with Jack and we can talk about exactly how we wanted to start this, because I just feel like I won't be able to move on until we get it where the audience can come into this show, not be info dumped, but still understand what's happening, but it's engaging and fun, and it's them wondering, and they don't have to go back and listen. I mean, obviously, go back and listen to Unspeakable Distance because it's great. But if you don't have time to do that, I need to be able to have you jump into this and get it and be emotionally invested.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're going to hammer that out, and you'll get together with Jack hopefully in that time.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to try my darndest to have episode 3 done. I'm not going to guarantee that that's going to happen. And obviously if I'm going to continue my effort to when when ideas occur to me that I can think of and write in other areas, I'm gonna kind of put that as a higher priority. But I'm because it has been working. It is useful. I found it very useful to try to force myself to jump around. But I'm also going to like hopefully have episode 3 done where I can show it to y'all and move on to the next one. That's my real goal.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. And that's it. And in that case, I will catch you and hopefully Jack and the audience again in 2 weeks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. All right. Thank you for joining us for Behind the Locked Doors, a library of cursed knowledge production podcast thing. I don't know. If you are interested in any of these projects, you can head over to library.horse, which will eventually redirect to a webpage once I make it, If you want to support the podcast, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/cursed knowledge. See y'all next week. No, wait. See y'all in 2 weeks.